Cold lake country, late autumn, the kind of sky that hangs low like wet wool and makes every tree look guilty. I remember the smell first. Not smoke, not rot, something older, like damp iron and spoiled milk. Coming out of a farmhouse I had passed 100 times and never noticed. The road there was a narrow vein through the pine, and the house sat back in a bowl of shadow, half swallowed by vines, the porch sagging like a mouth missing teeth. Folks in my county called it the Harlow place, but nobody ever went up the lane unless they had to. They said 3 people lived there for 30 years like one body, like a single heart that beat wrong. 2 brothers, 1 wife, a bargain nobody wanted to name. When the place finally opened, it opened with a scream you could not hear, only feel, because everything inside had been waiting to be seen. So, before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if this is your first time here at Tales Never Told, don't forget to subscribe. I bring you the stories that people bury in the ground and hope the worms can eat. This one is about a family pact that lasted a lifetime and still feels like it is not finished. I was deputy then. Younger, thinner, thinking law could stand between normal and what lives outside it. Our county sits north of the big river, where the water runs black most of the year, and fog crawls out at dawn like breath from a sleeping animal. The towns are small. The silences are big. People here keep their troubles in barns and their prayers in pockets, and you learn quick not to ask too many questions unless you want answers you can't unhear. The Harlow brothers were the kind of men you noticed without trying. Eli Harlow came first. Tall, shoulders like square posts, jaw set as if he had been chewing stone since boyhood. He was the older by 2 years. Born in the dead stretch of winter, when ice seals the world shut. He worked the sawmill, kept to himself, never drank in public, never smiled unless there was a reason. Mason Harlow was his shadow, but not his echo. Same height, same build, same eyes, but something softer in the corners, like he still remembered how to be a kid, before the farm made men of them. Mason was the one who talked when he had to. He drove into town for feed, nodded to people, sometimes even laughed. Folks liked him because he seemed human, and folks feared Eli because he seemed like a rule the woods wrote, long before any courthouse did. Their mother died early. Their father lasted longer, but went mean the way old dogs do when pain gets in their bones. Everybody knew the Harlow farm was hard. Soil too thin, winters too long, bills too heavy. A place that took more than it gave. The brothers grew up in that kind of grind. No sisters, no cousins close by. Just them, the land, and a father who believed love was something you earned with work and silence. When he died, he left the farm to both sons in equal parts. Folks said it was a kind gesture. It wasn't. It was a fuse. 2 men in one house, 1 deed, 1 failing farm, and a county that expected them to pick a lane and live separate anyway. They did not. They doubled down. They logged the high ridge. They trapped the creek bottoms. They built new fences, then rebuilt them when storms tore them apart. And still, the money did not come. A year after the funeral, a banker from Grove City drove out to talk terms. He came back pale and quiet, and he never returned. Not because something happened to him. Because he understood that getting paid from that farm was like trying to milk a dead cow. By then, the Harlow brothers were both pushing 30. Men that age in my county either marry or leave. The Harlows did neither. They went on like 2 gears locked together. Eli ran the crews when they took seasonal mill work. Mason kept the farm running. They slept in the same house, ate at the same table, paid the same debts. It was not a romance. It was survival by habit. Then Clara came. Clara Wynn was not from our county. She came down from the plateau country with a church group after a flood. I remember the day because my squad was hauling sandbags and redirecting traffic around fallen oaks. The flood cut half the lower roads off. Volunteers showed up in battered vans, young folks in muddy sneakers handing out casseroles and bottled water to people who would rather drown than accept charity. Clara was with them. Late 20s, dark hair braided under a red scarf, eyes the color of creek water when sun hits it. She carried herself like she had walked through hard parts before and had stopped being scared of anyone seeing her tired. She stayed longer than most. When the roads cleared and the vans left, she remained at the parish house a few more weeks, helping old folks gut their ruined kitchens, scrubbing mold off walls, sleeping on a cot, smiling like she could not help it. She met Mason first at the supply depot. He was stacking lumber and she was organizing meal boxes. Mason later told me she smiled at him, like he was not a stranger but a person. That mattered to him. Men who grow up without tenderness notice it the way thirsty men notice water. They spoke. Then they spoke again. He invited her up to the farm for supper in what I think was a moment of courage and terror mixed together. She went. She was not the kind to be spooked by quiet places. The farm that night was still wearing flood scars, mud on fence posts, debris in the lower pasture. Eli was there at the table when she arrived. He had washed and pulled on a clean shirt for the first time in weeks, Mason said. He did not say much over dinner. He watched. That was his way. Clara tasted the stew, complimented it, asked about the land, asked about their father, asked about the ridge. She did not flinch at Eli, which surprised him. A lot of women did. She asked his opinion on the repairs. He gave a short answer. She listened like it was enough. After she left, Mason told Eli he liked her. Eli did not say he liked her too, but he did not say no. That is where the story starts to tilt, even if nobody knew it yet. Clara kept coming. She would bring a pie on Sundays. She would show up to help split wood without being asked. She met people in town, but she never stayed long in town. She returned to that farm like the lane had a rope in it. Over the next months, she and Mason grew close. It was not loud or public. It was a slow settling, like two chairs pulled closer to a fire. She moved into the farmhouse that winter. Folks in town talked in the lazy way small towns do. They said poor Clara had no family, had fallen for a farm boy with a sad story, was playing house in a place she did not understand. That was the kind version. The unkind version was that she was trapping him, that she wanted the land, that she was pregnant already and hiding it. None of that was true. Not at first. She moved in because the farm needed hands, and because Mason asked, and because Eli did not object. The brothers fixed up the east bedroom for her. They did not have guests much. It felt like a ceremony putting clean sheets on a bed that had not seen clean sheets in a while. I saw her in town soon after, buying paint, nails, curtains. She was making the house into a place a woman could breathe inside. The brothers allowed it, because part of them wanted a home, not just a shelter. Mason proposed in spring, a small diamond in a plain gold setting. Clara said yes without fanfare. They married in the old church 3 weeks later. It was quiet, the kind you do when you are poor and don't need a parade. Eli stood beside Mason in the same suit he wore to their father's funeral. He did not smile in the photographs, but his eyes were not hard. They looked like a man watching his only brother step into a room he could never enter himself. After the wedding, things were normal for about a year. Normal for the Harlow place, anyway. Clara and Mason shared the main bedroom. Eli stayed in the west room. They all ate together. Clara started a garden. She taught Mason to read ledger books better. She kept the church ties. She hosted a few dinners for neighbors. The farm looked healthier. It was still poor, but it was breathing. When I drove past on patrol, I saw smoke from the chimney and a light in the kitchen window, and it made me think they might make it. There were no kids that first year. Clara wanted them. Mason wanted them too, I think. Eli never said what he wanted. Clara had 2 miscarriages nobody knew about, but the 3 of them. She told the doctor in town once. I saw the record later because I was helping a friend with a medical fraud case and it crossed my desk. She had gone alone, told him she had lost a pregnancy, and was not sure why. He asked about stress. She laughed and said, "Stress is a farm in winter." He told her to rest, to eat more, to avoid heavy lifting. She nodded. She did not tell him that if she rested, the barn would not get fixed and the cows would not get fed. She did not tell him that heavy lifting was not her first problem. The third pregnancy came late summer. She carried it further. She glowed in a way that made even Eli look at her with something like awe. Mason built a cradle. Eli repaired the roof over the nursery window. They were bracing for a new life to come in and change the shape of all three of them. The baby died in her belly at 7 months. Her labor started on a thunder night, the kind that splits trees. Mason came running to my house in the rain, because he did not trust the truck in the mud, and my place was closer to town. He was frantic and shaking, yelling her pains were bad, and the doctor was not coming quick enough. I drove him back, tires sliding in clay. We got there and Clara was in the bed, sweating cold, eyes wide and empty. Eli sat at the foot of the bed, holding her ankles because the midwife had not arrived yet. Mason was trying to do everything at once. I was not trained for childbirth, not then. I sent my wife for the midwife. We waited. The midwife came, the doctor came. They worked till morning. The baby was stillborn, a boy. I remember the sound Clara made when they showed her. It was not a scream. It was lower, like a thing in her chest cracking open. Mason held her. Eli stood at the doorway, face wet, not sure if it was sweat or tears. After that night, the farm went quiet in a new way. Not just grief, something else. Grief can pull people together or push them apart. This did both. Clara did not speak for a week. She stared at the ceiling, hand on her belly though it was already flat. She had milk come in and no mouth to feed. That does something to a woman. Mason tried to comfort her. He tried clumsy jokes, brought her soup, carried her outside to sit in sun. Eli did not know what to do, so he did what he always did when emotion got too big. He worked. He took extra shifts at the mill and slept in the barn when he came back, as if the house itself carried a smell he could not stand. Clara started walking at night. Neighbors saw her in the road by lantern light, barefoot, hair loose, going down toward the river. Mason would find her and bring her back without scolding. Because what is the use of scolding a person who is already drowning? The midwife said she needed to mourn. The church ladies brought casseroles. Those stopped after a month because people are kind, only as long as grief looks polite. Clara grief did not look polite. It looked like a storm that refused to end. She told Mason one night that she wanted another baby, and she wanted it soon, because the house felt hollow and she could hear the emptiness at night. Mason said yes. His eyes were red when he said it, like the yes hurt. He meant it. He also feared it. The doctor had warned them her body might not be able to carry, that another loss could kill her. But when a woman looks at you like her soul might leak out if you say no, you say yes. Months passed. No pregnancy. Clara grew thinner. She watched Mason sometimes with a heat I did not understand at the time. Not lust, desperation. She would pull him to bed early. She would weep if he could not keep up. She started measuring herself in failures. She started blaming him and then hating herself for blaming him. Eli came back into the house more as winter hit. He found Clara in the kitchen late one night, hands in flour, face streaked with tears, whispering to herself. He did not ask what was wrong. He just sat. He had a way of being present without prying. Clara later told me when this was all over that his presence felt like a porch light when you are lost. Quiet, constant, no questions. She started talking to him more. Not about babies, about the farm, about the river, about her childhood up on the plateau. He listened. When he spoke, it was short and solid. She felt safe in that. Safe is a dangerous word when you are starving for comfort. The first time anything crossed a line, nobody in town saw it. It happened in the barn during a sleet storm. Mason was at the mill on a double shift. Clara had gone to feed the animals. Eli was there fixing a hinge. She slipped on a patch of ice and went down hard. He caught her with a strong arm, pulled her up, said, "You all right?" She laughed because she had been scared and because laughing felt like breathing again. Her hands were on his chest. His hands were on her waist. It lasted a second too long. Then it ended. He stepped back. She stepped back. They did not speak of it. But when something like that happens in a house full of grief, it leaves a ripple. A week later, Clara and Eli were alone again in the kitchen. Mason was still out working. She had been crying over a cradle she kept in the attic. Eli came in, saw her, and for once did not retreat. He asked, "You thinking about him?" She nodded. He said, "I am too." Her eyes snapped up. Nobody had ever said that out loud. Not even Mason. The dead baby had become a ghost you did not name because naming makes it walk closer. Clara felt seen in that moment, like she had not felt since the burial. She put her hand on Eli's arm and said, "I can do this again, not alone." His jaw worked. He looked down. He said, "You are not alone." She said, "I mean in my body. I mean in my bed. I mean when Mason leaves and the nights stretch out and I feel like I am dying slow." Eli did not answer. He was not a man who knew how to answer that without shattering. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a hungry kiss. A plea. The kind that asks a question without words. He froze. Then he kissed her back. It was over fast. Two people stepping off a ledge and back onto the porch before they could fall. Afterward, Clara trembled and said, "We cannot." Eli stared at the floor and said, "We already did." She said, "I do not want to hurt him." Eli said, "I do not either." They sat in silence that felt like a trap closing. It should have ended there. If this was a story about a one-time betrayal, it would be sad and human and done. That is not what this is. Grief makes people invent rules to survive. They invent bargains with themselves. They invent pacts with devils they do not believe in. The next time they crossed the line, they did it with words. Clara told Eli, "If we tell him, he will leave." Eli said, "If we do not tell him, he will still be betrayed." Clara said, "If I cannot carry his child, he will leave anyway." Eli said, "We do not know that." Clara said, "We do." Eli looked at her long and said, "What do you want?" She said, "I want a baby. I want a family that does not break. I want both of you in the house, not one in the ground and one out in the cold." Eli said, "You want me to be in your bed." Clara swallowed and said, "I want you to be part of what saves us." Eli did not like that word saves. It sounded like a shovel. But he could not deny the truth in her face. She was not seducing him for fun. She was reaching for a lifeline. He said, "Mason would not agree." Clara said, "He would if he thought it kept me alive." Eli said, "He would never look at me the same." Clara said, "He already does not look at you. He looks through you like you belong to the farm and not the family." That stung because it was not wholly false. Mason loved Eli, but he had never learned how to share a home with him and a wife at once. There was always a line in his head between brother and marriage, and the line was getting shaky. Clara saw that. She used it. She hated herself for using it, but she did it anyway. A week later, she told Mason the truth in a way that was half truth and half knife. She said she had been lonely. She said she had kissed Eli. She said nothing more had happened. She was not sure she wanted more to happen, but she was scared and broken, and she did not know what else to do. Mason went white. He did not shout. That is what surprised me later. He just sat at the table, with his hands tight around a cup. He asked her if she loved Eli. She said no in the way a person says no, when the no is complicated. Mason looked over at Eli, who had taken the seat by the stove, eyes on the floor. Mason asked, "Did you touch her?" Eli said yes, and his voice sounded like gravel. Mason breathed out slow. He said, "Why?" Eli said, "Because she was falling apart." Mason said, "What are you saying?" Eli said, If you want to be angry. But do not pretend you did not see her in the attic with the cradle. Do not pretend you did not hear her crying when you were gone. I did what I thought kept her alive. Mason flinched. He said, "She is my wife." Eli said, "She is a person." The air went sharp. Clara started crying. Mason stood and walked out. He did not go far. He went to the porch and sat in the dark. The next day he went to the river alone. Cane pole, tackle tin, the old quiet ritual. He did not fish much. He sat, thinking. That is what he later told me. There was war in his head. Not just betrayal. The deeper fear that his family line was ending, that the farm would swallow him before he could build anything worth leaving behind. He had loved Clara from the start, but he had not loved her body the way she needed in grief. He had been good, but goodness is not always enough. He came back at dusk and said, "We talk." He sat with Clara and Eli at the table. He said, "I will not lose my brother. I will not lose my wife. I will not lose the chance at a child. If this is the road we take it together, and we never lie again." Clara sobbed and nodded. Eli said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "If we do this, it is not for lust. It is not for ease. It is for survival." Mason said, "I do not care what word you use. I only care that you do not take what is mine behind my back again." Eli said, "She is not mine or yours." Mason swallowed. He had a temper, but he also had sense. He said, "Fine, but I need a rule." Clara said, "What rule?" Mason said, "We do not hide. We do not sneak. If you go to him, I know. If he comes to you, I know. If a child comes from this, it is ours, all of ours, and nobody outside this house ever hears a word about how it happened." Clara asked, "Are you sure?" Mason said, "I am not sure about anything, but I'm sure I'm not burying you or living without either of you." Eli finally nodded. The pact was born right there in that kitchen. 3 people making a deal in the dark like it was a business arrangement. It did not feel evil to them at first. It felt like a triage, like taking a limb off to save a life. The first months after the pact were careful and strange. They set a schedule without saying schedule. Clara would sleep with Mason most nights. Twice a week, or when Mason was away working, she would sleep with Eli. There was no romance to it, not in the beginning. There was awkwardness and quiet guilt, and a kind of shared focus that made it feel like they were all rowing the same boat through a foggy channel. The church ladies would have fainted if they knew. The county would have laughed and cursed and maybe burned the house down. But nobody knew. That is what secrecy does. It makes you look normal on the outside while the inside bends. Clara got pregnant in early spring. She told both brothers the same hour, standing in the doorway of the nursery with a hand on her stomach, eyes wide with fear and hope. Mason hugged her and cried. Eli stepped back like he might break if he got too close. She reached for him and said, "We did it." He said, "You did it." She said, "No, we did." The pregnancy went smooth till late summer. Clara was terrified of another stillborn. Every cramp made her pale. Every quiet moment made her angry at the world. Mason doted on her. Eli did the heavy work and brought her water without being asked. They were tender in an unsteady way. She delivered in late autumn, on a clear, cold morning. A living boy. Strong lungs, pink skin, a shock of dark hair. She wept and laughed like a person being pulled from a well. Both brothers stood at the foot of the bed. Mason held her left hand. Eli held her right. The midwife asked who the Tiawa father was, for the record. Clara looked at Mason and then at Eli. Mason said, "Put me down." Eli flinched but did not argue. That was the first lie they sealed into paper. It was not the last. They named him Samuel. The whole county came by to congratulate. They saw a happy young family. 2 brothers, yes, but folks just assumed Eli was the uncle who lived on the farm because he had nowhere else to go. Nobody found that suspicious. We had plenty of families like that. They brought gifts, they brought blankets, They brought advice. Clara smiled through it and held her baby and thought she had gotten away with something. She had. But getting away with something does not mean it does not change you. The pact should have ended after Samuel. It did not. It had built a road in their minds and bodies, and roads do not vanish just because you reach the town you wanted. Clara told Mason she wanted another child. Mason said yes, because now yes was the easiest prayer. Eli did not speak, but he did not leave. The arrangement continued. Over the years, the lines blurred. Clara and Eli stopped treating their nights as duty. They started leaning into them. They started laughing together in ways Mason did not always share. That made Mason hollow in a new way. He had agreed to the pact because he could not lose them, but he did lose something anyway. Little daily pieces. He lost the idea that Clara was his alone. He lost the idea that Eli was his brother alone. He had made a deal with fire and then lived in the smoke. The next child came 2 years later. A girl, Lila. Light hair, pale green eyes. People said she looked like Clara. Some said she looked like Mason's mother. Nobody said she looked like Eli, but she did. Her brow heavy, her stare steady. Eli noticed and smiled once when she gripped his finger in baby rage. Clara saw that smile and felt a chill of pride and guilt together. The third child came not long after, another boy, Jonah. By then their rhythm was set. Their secrecy was a habit. They had created a sealed world up that lane where 3 people could live, in a shape the county would have named sin, and the children would never question because they had no reason to. To them, Uncle Eli was part of the house, the way a stove is part of a kitchen. Constant, normal. The farm improved, not because of magic, because 3 adults working in one unit can pull a farm up from the mud. They expanded the herd. They leased a strip of timber. They paid off the bank. They repaired the porch. Folks in town started saying the Harlows were lucky. I heard that word a lot. I never liked it. Luck is a coin people use when they do not want to see what someone paid. The pact lasted. It lasted through the children growing, through seasons cycling, through Mason and Eli hitting their 40s and then their 50s. It lasted through Clara learning to hide her love in 2 different rooms without showing the seam. It lasted because nobody outside ever forced it into daylight. But inside, daylight was starting to rot. The first crack showed in the children. Samuel grew into a quiet boy who watched everything. He was smart, not book smart at first, but the kind that notices patterns. He noticed his father and Uncle Eli treating each other like rivals in little ways. The way Mason would snap if Eli corrected him. The way Eli would go silent when Clara stroked Mason's hair at the table. He noticed Clara floating between them like a person walking a tightrope. He did not have words for any of it. He just felt the tightness. Lila was different. She adored Eli. She followed him in the fields. She wanted to learn every tool he touched. She trusted him like he was a second father, and, in a way, he was. Jonah was a storm boy, loud and fearless, always trying to prove himself to both men at once, never sure whose approval mattered more. The house felt the tension, even when nobody named it. Secrets leak through pores. They leak into meals, into chores, into the way people close doors too quietly. The second crack was in Mason. He started drinking more after the children got older. Not drunk in public, not a spectacle, just a slow drip of whiskey and coffee, a bottle tucked behind the feed sacks, a man trying to dull the sound of his own thoughts. He had never fully made peace with the pact. He had endured it because he loved them. Endurance turns to resentment when years stack up. He began picking fights with Eli about nothing. Fence lines, store receipts, the way Eli whistled in the barn. Eli would take the blows without matching. That only made Mason angrier. He wanted a fight, because fights have rules. Silent resentment does not. Clara tried to smooth it. She would pull Mason to bed, talk soft, remind him why they did this. She would pull Eli aside, ask him to let Mason feel like a man again. Eli would nod and do what he could, but you cannot give someone else your own peace. They were in their late 50s when the outside world started pushing in for real. Samuel left for college on a scholarship. He was the first Harlow to leave the ridge without a shovel or rifle. Clara cried for weeks. Mason pretended he was proud without understanding. Eli was proud in a quiet way. Lila married young, a boy from Marrow County. She moved away, but visited often with babies on her hip. Jonah stayed on the farm, restless, drinking with his father, working with his uncle. He had never decided which man he wanted to be. The Pact by then had become almost invisible to them day to day, like a scar you forget until weather changes. Clara still slept with Mason most nights. She still slept with Eli when Mason was away or when something between them went hard and she needed to soften it. It was not weekly anymore. It was whenever the house needed balance. That is what Clara told herself. The truth was, she loved them both in different ways that had become tangled. She loved Mason like a storm you survive with. She loved Eli like a tree you lean on when your legs fail. She could not imagine losing either, and that fear had become the real engine of the Pact. The night everything broke open was a late October night, 30 years after the kitchen deal. There was a cold snap, the kind that makes old bones ache. Mason had been drinking since afternoon because a calf died and the bank sent a tax letter and he had started hearing his own mortality in the wind. Jonah was out with friends. Eli was in the barn closing up. Clara was in the kitchen peeling apples, thinking about Samuel coming home for Thanksgiving. Mason stumbled in, smelled of whiskey and wet leaves. He watched her a moment. Then he said a thing he had never said out loud. I do not know if he planned it, or if it slipped out of what he had been swallowing for 3 decades. He said, "You ever wonder which one of us made Samuel?" Clara froze. Her knife stayed poised over Apple's skin. She said, "Why you asking that now?" Mason said, "Because I am tired of not knowing anything in my own life. I am tired of waking up and seeing him in that boy eyes and wondering if he is mine or Eli." Clara said, "He is yours." Mason laughed a short, bitter laugh. He said, "You told me that about all of them. You had to, but you never knew." She said, "It does not matter." He said, "It mattered to me every day. It mattered when he called me Pa and I felt like a thief. It mattered when Eli looked at him like he belonged to him too. It mattered when neighbors praised my family, my line, my legacy, like I had done it alone." Clara put the knife down. She said, "We did not do it for legacy. We did it so I would not die. We did it so we would not lose each other." Mason said, "We lost anyway." He moved closer. His eyes were wet. He was not just drunk, he was cracked open. He said, "You loved him more." Clara said, "That is not true." Mason said, "You never looked at me the way you looked at him when you thought I was asleep." Clara said, "That is your fear talking." Mason said, "My fear has been talking a long time." He slammed his fist on the table, not hard enough to break it, hard enough to scare her. He said, "Tell me the truth. Which one of us is the father of Samuel?" Clara felt a coldness rise in her chest because she suddenly understood what he wanted. Not biology, confession, a way to turn memory into a weapon. She said, "I will not talk about that." Mason said, "You will. I deserve to know." Clara said, "You agreed to the pact. You said we would never speak of it again." Mason said, "I agreed because I had no spine then. I have one now." She said, "Stop." Mason said, "If you do not tell me, I will tell Samuel. I will tell the whole damn county. I will tell them I raised children that might not be mine, that my brother slept in our bed, that my wife split herself in half and called it love." Clara went pale. She said, "You would not." Mason said, "Try me." That is when Eli came in. He had heard the shouting from the yard. He stepped into the kitchen with hay on his boots and frost in his beard. He took in the scene quick. Clara shaken. Mason wild. He said, "What is this?" Mason turned on him. He said, "It is what you made it." Eli said, "I did not make anything." Mason said, "You took my wife." Eli said, "You gave her to me." The words hit like a thrown hammer. Mason stared. Then he went for the bottle on the counter. Eli grabbed his wrist. Mason jerked free and swung. It was the first fight they had ever had with fists, not because they had never wanted to, because they had always been afraid of what a real fight would unlock. Mason hit Eli hard in the jaw. Eli staggered but did not go down. He grabbed Mason's shirt and shoved him back into the pantry door. Clara screamed at them to stop. Mason flailed, caught Eli's ear, drew blood. Eli hauled Mason upright, slammed him into the table. Apples rolled, knife clattered to the floor. Mason reached for it. Clara moved first, kicked it away into the corner. Eli pinned Mason with one arm and said, "You are drunk. You are not thinking." Mason spat blood and said, "I have been thinking for 30 years, you stone bastard." He drove his knee up into Eli's gut. Eli grunted, loosened, and Mason slid free. He grabbed a fireplace poker from the stand and swung. Eli lifted his arm to block. The poker cracked his forearm with a sound like green wood snapping. Eli roared in pain. Mason swung again. This time Clara grabbed Mason's shoulder, trying to pull him back. He shoved her hard without meaning to. She hit the stove and went down. Her head struck the iron lip. She did not move. The room went dead quiet. Eli froze. Mason froze with the poker half raised. They looked at her on the floor like the world had just cracked open and shown a void. Eli sank to his knees beside her. He touched her face. He said, "Clara." No answer. Mason backed away, horror draining the whiskey from his eyes. He whispered, "Clara, I did not." He did not finish. Eli pressed fingers to her neck. He could not find a pulse. He said, "Get the truck." Mason just stared. Eli screamed, "Get the truck!" Mason ran out into the cold night. Tires spun in mud. He barreled down the lane toward town for help. Eli stayed with her, holding her like a child, rocking, whispering her name over and over, as if repetition could pull skin back over a wound in reality. When I got the call, it was a garbled, panicked voice on the line at the station. It was Mason. He was sobbing so hard I could barely understand him. "Wife hurt, come now, please." I drove up with siren off because the road was too narrow and wet. I arrived to find Eli on the kitchen floor with Clara in his arms. Blood on her hair. Blood on his sleeve from his broken arm. His face was blank in a way that scared me more than grief. Mason stood at the doorway shaking. I checked Clara. She was gone. A simple impact, a bad angle, a chance moment that ends whole worlds in a breath. Mason made a noise like an animal when I told him. Eli did not make any sound at all. He just kept holding her. I called for the coroner. I called for backup. My mind was still in procedure. The scene did not add up to me yet. It was a domestic accident. That is what it looked like. Two men fighting, woman caught between. But the air in that kitchen was thick with something else. Not just death, a long buried thing surfacing. Jonah came home in the middle of the night when news spread. He walked in, stared at his mother's body on the floor, then looked at his father and uncle with eyes that wanted to kill. He did not know why they fought. He only knew she was dead and they were alive. He screamed at them, "What did you do?" Mason tried to speak. Eli tried to speak. Neither could. Jonah shoved Mason hard. Mason collapsed into a chair. Eli got up slow, arm hanging limp, and stepped toward Jonah. Jonah swung on him. Eli did not block. The fist landed on his cheek. Eli turned his face back, calm, and said, "You do not know." Jonah screamed, "I do not care." The backup I called arrived and separated them. The coroner came. We carried Clara out. The house stood empty after like a shell a turtle left. Over the next days the truth began to untangle because secrets do not survive a death like that. Mason sat with me at the station 2 days later, eyes hollow, hands trembling. He said, "I need to tell you something before the town makes up worse." I said, "Tell me." He told me the pact, all of it, from the barn slip to the kitchen deal to the years. He told me because he could not bear to carry it alone, now that Clara was dead. He told me because he thought maybe if the story was in my hands, it would not get twisted by gossip into something even uglier. When he finished, he put his face in his hands and said, "I killed her. I know I killed her." I said, "You did not plan it." He said, "Planned or not, dead is dead." He looked like a man who had lost everything twice. I asked him why he wanted to expose it now, he said. "Because it is already exposed inside me. I can't put it back." I went up to the farm after that to speak with Eli. He was sitting on the porch in a sling, staring at the pasture like he was trying to remember what it used to be. He did not look up when I walked up. I said, "Mason told me." He closed his eyes. He said, "I figured he would." I said, "Why did you do it?" He said, "Because my brother asked me not to leave. Because Clara was dying and my brother was not enough to hold her. Because once a line is crossed, you have to decide if you live on the far side or drown trying to swim back." I asked if he ever loved her. He nodded once. He said, "I did." I asked if he ever wanted the pact to end. He said, "Every day for the first year." Then not at all. Then every day again when I saw what it was doing to Mason. I asked if he thought the children knew. He said, "They felt something. Kids always do. They feel what adults try to bury." I asked if he knew which were his. He stared out at the tree line. He said, "No. I never needed to know. They were all hers. They were all ours." That was the truth and the lie combined. The county found out anyway. You cannot keep something like that quiet once a deputy knows and a father is whispering in a bar. People talked. The church gossiped. The local paper sent a thin reporter who tried to get quotes. Most folks did not know what to do with the story. Some called Clara a harlot. Some called the brothers perverts. Some called it a tragedy. The harshest ones said she got what she deserved. Those were usually men who had never loved anyone enough to break a rule for them. Samuel came home for the funeral. I watched him step into the church in a black suit that looked too city for our pews. He said nothing until after the burial. Then he came to see me at the station. He had heard rumors already. He asked if they were true. I did not want to be the one to tell him. But lies were the family disease. I told him yes. His face went still the way people go, still when something heavy blows through their chest. He said, "Which one is my father?" I said, "I do not know." He said, "They know." I said, "They never said." He laughed once, sharp. He said, "Of course they never said." He left without another word. A week later, he confronted Mason and Eli himself. I was not there, but Jonah told me. He said Samuel stood in the kitchen where Clara died and demanded answers. Mason wept. Eli kept quiet. Samuel looked at both of them and said, I grew up feeling like a third man was always in the room. I thought it was God, or ghosts. Turns out it was just you two tearing each other apart in slow motion." He asked again which was his father. Mason said, "I am." Eli said, "I am your uncle." Samuel snapped, "That is not an answer." Eli said, "It is the only answer I have." Samuel stared at Eli for a long time. Then he looked at Mason and said, "You let this happen." Mason whispered, "I thought it would save us." Samuel said, "It saved nobody." He left again, and this time he did not come back for years. Jonah stayed, but something in him curdled. He started drinking heavier, fighting in town. He could not hold the two images in his head at once. His mother as saint, his father and uncle as men who shared her. He resolved the conflict by hating both. Lila learned the truth from gossip. She went silent for months, then cut contact. She told a cousin that she felt like her whole childhood had been staged, like a play in a house that was never real. She never brought her kids back to the farm. The brothers stayed on the farm after Clara's funeral, because where else could they go? Eli was quieter than ever. Mason aged 10 years overnight. Their relationship did not repair. It did not end either. It just hollowed. They had built their lives, braided together, and could not unbraid, even if the braid was strangling them now. Mason signed the deed over to Jonah in a shaky hand one winter afternoon and said, "I am done." He moved into a trailer behind the old mill and drank himself small. Eli stayed in the farmhouse alone when Jonah finally left too. The house grew dark. The porch sagged. Vines came back. Then one January, long after my hair went gray, a fire took the place. Not arson, not lightning, a stove left on in a cold house with tired wiring. Eli died in it. They found him near the nursery door, like he had been walking toward the room Clara painted all those years ago. Mason came to the funeral in a borrowed coat. He stood by the grave and said nothing. 3 months later, he was found in his trailer. Heart stopped. Bottle on the floor. The county called it a sad end to a strange family. They were right about the end. They were wrong about the strange. The strange was never that two brothers shared one wife. The strange was that they believed a pact could keep grief from chewing them up. The strange was that they thought love could be rationed like feed and still stay pure. The strange was how long secrecy can feel like solution before it turns into a slow poison. I have had years to think on it. I do not tell this story to spit on Clara's memory. She was not a villain. She was a woman in a hard place who loved 2 men and wanted a child more than she wanted her reputation. I do not tell it to paint the brothers as demons. They were not. They were men shaped by land and loss, and a father who taught them work mattered more than tenderness. When the dead baby came, it cracked their world. They tried to patch it with the nearest thing they had, each other. That patch held for 30 years and then failed in a minute. Sometimes that is how horror works. Not a monster in the woods, not a ghost in the attic. Just a decision made in desperation, carried day by day until it becomes a house you cannot leave. People sometimes ask if I think there was something cursed about that farm. I do not know. I have seen enough to believe land remembers. I have also seen enough to believe people do this to themselves without any help from the dark. What I know is this. If you make a pact in grief, you are not signing it with ink. You are signing it with time, and time always collects. If you made it this far, hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel and tells me you want more tales pulled out of the quiet dirt. And if you are sitting in a house with a secret that feels like salvation, listen close the next time the night goes quiet. Quiet is not peace. Quiet is the room right before the truth walks in. After I told you that last line, I sat with it a long time myself, because even now, when cold settles and the pines go still, I can feel that kitchen again. The apples rolling like small red hearts getting away. The sound of bone on iron, the kind of moment that rewrites every memory that came before it. But there is more to it than the clean version I gave you. More than a sad pact and a bad night. You don't live 30 years in a secret house without leaving fingerprints on the walls, and you don't bury a story like that without it pushing back from underground in ways you do not expect. I learned that part slow, piece by piece, after the funerals and the gossip and the fire, when most people had moved on to new scandals and new griefs. I had not. Maybe because I was deputy, maybe because I was a woman who had watched a mother die in her own kitchen. Maybe because the Harlow place had always felt like a knot in the county rope that I kept tripping over without seeing it. Either way, when a thing sticks in your bones, you turn it in your hands until you find the sharp edge. A month after Clara's burial, I went back up that lane to bring Eli a stack of forms he needed to sign for the insurance and the probate. I told myself that was all. It was not. I wanted to see what the house felt like without her in it. Houses change when a person dies inside them. They either collapse or get cold. The Harlow farmhouse got cold. You could feel it before you stepped onto the porch. The air around it was thin, like the land itself had exhaled and not wanted to breathe back in. Eli opened the door with his sling on, beard grown out, eyes sunk deep. He did not invite me in, but he did not tell me to leave. That was Eli. He moved aside, and I stepped into a silence so thick it felt like dust. The kitchen table was scrubbed bare. The stove was dark. The curtains Clara had hung were still there, but the color looked wrong without her hands moving behind them. I laid the forms down and started to explain. Eli nodded without listening. He was staring at the spot by the stove where she had fallen. After a minute, he said, "I keep hearing her steps upstairs." I looked at him, not sure if he was making a remark the way old widowers do. A half joke, half ache. His face was flat. He was not joking. I said, "You mean you remember her steps?" He shook his head. He said, "I mean I hear boots on the nursery floor some nights. Light steps, like she is rocking a baby up there." I felt my skin go tight. I said, "You been sleeping?" He said, "Some." Then he said, "It isn't always her. Sometimes it sounds like a man in the hall, slow, heavy, like a third person walking in a house that is already full." He looked at me then, eyes sharp for the first time in weeks, and he said, "I do not know if it is grief or the house punishing me." I did not have a neat answer. Deputy training does not cover the way guilt changes sound. I said, "Houses settle, old boards pop." He stared at me like he knew that was not enough. Then he went quiet again, and I could feel the conversation close, the way a gate closes when wind turns. I had him sign the forms. I left. Halfway down the lane, I pulled over, because I had forgotten my pen. That is what I told myself. I went back in. Eli was not in the kitchen. I heard him moving in the back hall, the thump of a man doing chores out of habit. I called out, "Eli, I need my pen." He didn't answer. I stepped toward the hall. The nursery door at the top of the stairs was open. I had not noticed that before. A draft from upstairs carried down that damp iron smell I had felt the first time I ever drove past that farm years ago, the one I told you about at the start. It hit me again like a memory that was not mine. I should have stayed at the bottom of the stairs. I went up anyway. The nursery was small, painted a faded butter yellow. A rocking chair sat under the window. The cradle Mason had built was crooked in the corner, dusty now. On the floor were toys that looked untouched for years, worn wooden blocks, a rag doll missing one button eye, a carved horse with paint rubbed away. The kind of room a farm mother makes when she believes life is about to bloom. I had seen it before when Lila was little. It had been bright then. Now it felt like a jar left open too long. I took a step in, and the floorboard creaked. The rocking chair moved a hair. Not rocking, just shifting, like someone had just stood up from it. I froze. I am not a jumpy person, but that room had weight. It pressed the air toward the floor. I looked around and saw a thin line of mud across the sill. Fresh. Not years old. Fresh like someone tracked it in on a boot when the ground was wet. Nobody had been up there since the funeral. Not that I knew. I turned and saw on the wall, behind the cradle, something scratched into the paint, faint, like a nail dragged there over and over. It was not a word, it was a mark. 3 parallel slashes, then another 3, then another set of 3, all uneven like shaking hands did them. Counting. That is what it looked like. Counting what, I did not know. I backed out of the room. I went downstairs quick, heart not racing, but heavy. Eli was at the sink, rinsing a cup even though there was nothing in it. I said, "You been upstairs?" He didn't look up. He said, "Not since she died." I said, "There is fresh mud in the nursery." He paused. Then he said, "It wasn't me." I believed him, and that scared me more than if he had lied. I said, "Jonah been around?" He said, "Not in weeks." I said, "Anyone else?" Eli shook his head. Then he said, "Sometimes I wake and the door is open. I lock it. I swear I lock it. Then I wake and it is open again." I asked if he wanted me to check the locks, maybe the hinges were. Loose. He said no, but his voice was small. I did not say another word. I went home with my pen and a feeling that the story had not ended with Clara dying at the stove. A week later, I got a call from Samuel. He was still in town, staying at a motel because he could not stand being in that house. His voice was controlled in the way people sound when they are holding a lid on a boiling pot. He said, "Deputy, I need a favor." I said, "Sure." He said, "My mother's things, I want them. Not to keep in this county, to take with me." I said, "They are yours." He said, "My father won't let me in the upstairs rooms. He says it isn't good for me to go there." I said, "You are grown." He said, "I know, but I do not want to fight. Could you come with me?" Just so he stays calm. I agreed. We went up together that afternoon. Mason was in the yard splitting kindling. He looked like a scarecrow somebody had tried to dress in grief. He saw Samuel, stiffened, then saw me, and seemed to deflate. He said, "What is this?" Samuel said, "I want mama things." Mason said, "I told you we will send them." Samuel said, "I need to see them myself." Mason looked at me. I said, "He has a right." Mason swallowed, nodded, and led us inside. Eli was not home. That helped. We went upstairs to the east bedroom, the one Clara had first moved into. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old soap. Clara dresses hung in the closet like empty skins. A jewelry box sat on the dresser. Samuel opened drawers and found letters tied with ribbon, a small Bible with notes in the margins, a tin of pressed flowers. A lock of baby hair in an envelope marked Sam's first cut. He touched each thing like it might burn. He said nothing. Then he knelt by the bed and pulled a wooden trunk from beneath it. There was a lock on it. Samuel looked at me and said, "I never knew about this." I said, "We can ask your father." He shook his head. He said, "He will say no." He took a screwdriver from his pocket, like he had planned this, and pried the lock plate loose. The wood cracked. The lid lifted. Inside were more letters, some folded tight, some loose. A wool shawl, a pair of tiny booties, and a notebook, bound in brown leather. Samuel picked the notebook up and stared like he had found a hornet's nest. He opened it. His eyes moved fast. Then he shut it and held it to his chest. He said, "I cannot read this here." I said, "Samuel, what is it?" He said, "Her journal." I said, "If there is something important, I might need to know." He looked at me with a flat sadness. He said, "Everything in it is important." He put it in his bag. We started down the stairs. In the hall, Samuel paused and stared at a spot on the wall by the nursery door. I followed his gaze. There was a faint greasy smear there, like a hand had brushed past again and again. He whispered, "That wasn't there when I was a kid." I said, "What wasn't?" He said, "That smell." I noticed it then, not strong. A damp iron tang that did not fit the lavender and dust of the upstairs. Samuel said, "It is like blood that has been washed but never leaves." He took a slow breath and said, "I think she was writing to someone." I said, "In the journal?" He nodded. He said, "I think she was writing to me." We got downstairs and Mason was waiting in the kitchen. He saw the bag. He said, "You got what you need?" Samuel said yes. Mason nodded once and went outside without another word. Samuel and I walked to his car. He opened the trunk and put the bag inside. His hands were shaking now. He looked at me and said, "Deputy, can you do me another favor?" I said, "You do not have to ask twice." He said, "If I read this and it is as bad as I think it will be, I might not be able to look at them without wanting to kill them." I said, "I understand." He said, "Do not let me do something stupid if I come running back." I said, "You are not alone." He laughed without humor. He said, "I have been alone since the day I was born." He drove away. That night I could not sleep. The draft under my own bedroom door felt like the nursery draft I had felt at the Harlow place. I kept thinking about that journal and what a woman would write after living a pact for 3 decades. People imagine secrets as a single knot. They forget secrets have tendrils. They wrap around everything you do. They make you write in code. They make you count on walls. The next morning, Samuel called again. He did not sound like himself. His voice was low and raw. He said, "I read it." I said, "Okay." He said, "She knew." I said, "Knew what?" He said, "She knew it would end like this." I said, "Samuel, talk to me." He said, "It isn't a question of who fathered me. It is worse. She wrote about a thing in that house." I asked him to slow down. He did, but only because he was trying to keep his voice from breaking. He said, after the dead baby, before the Pact, when she started walking at night, she went to the river. She always went to the river, because she could not sleep and because she wanted the sound of water to drown the sound of her own head. One night she saw lights down by the old ferry landing, way past the field. She thought it was poachers or teenagers drinking. She walked closer. She heard singing, not church singing. Something older, she said. A humming line of voices, low and steady. She saw shapes in the fog. She called out. Nobody answered. She stepped into the mud and smelled that iron smell. She saw a figure break from the line and walk toward her. She couldn't see its face at first. Then it moved into moonlight and she saw it was her husband, Mason, but his eyes looked wrong, like he wasn't inside them. He told her to go home. She asked why he was out there. He said nothing. Another figure stepped up beside him. Eli. And behind them, more shapes, neighbors from the ridge, men she knew from church and market, all standing barefoot in the riverbank mud, all humming that low tune like a swarm. Clara wrote that they were holding something in the water between them, like a bundle, like a body wrapped in cloth. She asked what it was. Eli looked at her and said, "Go home." She said, "What are you doing?" Mason said, "Paying a debt." She ran. She didn't look back. She came home and locked the door and prayed. The next day nobody spoke of it. Mason acted normal. Eli acted normal. The neighbors acted normal. She thought maybe she had dreamed it. But then she found mud prints in the hall all the way from the back door to the nursery. She found wet cloth in the washtub that smelled like river rot. She asked Mason. He said he had no idea what she meant. She asked Eli. He said the river runs high this time of year. She wrote that after that, she felt a presence in the house at night. Not a ghost, not a person, a weight moving through the rooms like fog with a mind. She started hearing heavy steps in the attic. She thought it was rats. Then she heard a voice once, not words, a breath with intention. She wrote that the night she miscarried the second time, she woke and saw a man standing at the foot of the bed. Not Mason, not Eli. A third man, taller than either, shoulders too wide, hair wet like he had climbed out of the river. He leaned over her belly and pressed a cold hand there. She could not scream. She could not move. She felt a nausea like the room had tilted. Then he stepped back into the corner and disappeared like smoke pulled into a crack. When she lost the baby the next day, she thought of that hand and knew it was not chance. She wrote that she never told the brothers because she did not want them to think she was losing her mind. She started leaving bowls of salt by the door, the way her grandmother had taught her. She started humming hymns under her breath at night because sound makes you feel less alone. Then the Pact started and the presence changed. It stopped feeling hungry. It started feeling interested, like it was watching them build a thing it wanted to see. She wrote that on nights she went to Eli. She woke with bruises on her thighs that did not fit the way Eli touched her. She wrote that once she woke and saw wet footprints at the side of the bed, big ones, bigger than any man she knew. She wrote that she found those 3 scratch marks behind the cradle, and she did not remember making them. She wrote that sometimes she would look at the brothers and not recognize them for a heartbeat, like their edges had blurred and some other faces were wearing their faces. She wrote, the house is not a house. It is a mouth. It wants us inside it together. It keeps us. It makes the rules. We think we chose this, but I am not sure the choosing started with us. Samuel said all of that in one breath to me, then went quiet like he was waiting for me to call him crazy. I did not. I had stood in that nursery and felt the air get heavy. I had seen fresh mud where no one had walked. I had heard Eli say he heard steps when nobody was there. I said, "Samuel, do you think she believed this was real?" He said, "She was not a fanciful woman. She wasn't the kind to tell ghost stories. She was writing because she was terrified." I asked why he was telling me now. He said, "Because if something is still in that house, my father and uncle are going to die in it the way she did." I said, "They are grown men." He said, "They are grown men who already gave a third of their life to that place. They never left because they couldn't. Maybe they never left because it wouldn't let them." I told him I would go back up there. He said, "Please do." I drove to the Harlow place alone that afternoon. The day was gray, wind low, leaves slick on the road. As I turned up the lane, I saw Mason in the yard sitting on a stump staring at nothing. Eli was in the barn. I parked and walked up. Mason looked at me like he was seeing me through a pane of dirty glass. I said, "Mason, I need to ask you something." He blinked slow. I said, "Have you been down at the river at night?" He frowned. He said, "I fish sometimes." I said, "Not fishing. I mean in groups. I mean with the neighbors. I mean holding something in the water." His eyes narrowed. He said, "Who told you that?" I said, "Clara wrote about it." He went very still. I could see his throat work. He said, "She saw that." I said, "She said it scared her." He whispered, "She should not have been there." I said, "What was it?" He stared past me toward the river line. He said, "There is an old thing in these woods. Folks on this ridge know it. We do not talk about it in town because town people laugh and then they come up here and get lost and then we bury them and we do not laugh anymore." I said, "What old thing?" He said, "A hunger, a debt collector, a thing that lives where the river bends and the fog sits. It does not have a name. It has a bargain. My father taught us. His father taught him. When the land goes bad and the house goes empty, you pay a debt or you lose everything." I said, "Pay with what?" He said, "With what you can stand to lose." I felt my stomach go cold. I said, "What did you lose?" He looked at me and his eyes filled but no tears fell. He said, "Our first son, the stillborn." I said, "Mason, you are telling me you gave a dead baby to a thing in the river." He flinched like I slapped him. He said, "He was already gone. We were desperate. The doctor said Clara might not carry again. The bank was on our neck. The cows were dying. The winter was coming. We did not know what else to do. Eli said there was a way. He had found it in our father's books. He said if we offered the child, the thing would turn its eyes away from our house. It would let us keep what we had." I said, "Did it?" He said, "For a while." I said, "Clara saw you." He said, "We never meant her to. We told her to stay home. She did not listen." I said, "Was the humming hers?" He nodded. He said, "It makes the thing hear you, like a bell." I said, "Mason, is this why the Pact started?" He looked like a man trying to remember which way was up. He said, "The Pact started because Eli said the thing wanted a family knot. He said the thing had taken what it could from us, and now if we wanted a live child, it needed a shape to live around. It needed 3 people in one bed, one house, one breath. He said the thing feeds on that. Not blood, not meat. It feeds on the way people twist to keep each other." I said, "You believed him?" He said, "I wanted to believe anything that kept Clara alive." I said, "Did Eli believe it?" He said, "He did not believe. He knew." I heard a slow footfall in the barn then. Eli stepping out, arm in sling, face shadowed. He had heard the last part. He walked toward us and said, "Stop telling her." Mason snapped, "Why? Nothing matters now." Eli said, "It matters because she is law and law is hungry for stories." Mason laughed again, that bitter bark. He said, "Law did not save Clara." Eli looked at me and said, "We are not crazy, deputy. We are not drunk on superstition. We made a bargain long ago because this ridge does not forgive weakness." I said, "You are telling me you offered a dead child to something in the river, and you built a 3-person marriage because you thought it would give you living children." Eli said, We did not build it because we thought. It was the rule. The thing made its rule clear. It came to Clara at night. It took the babies from her body. We tried to keep it from taking the next. You want to know why the stillborn happened? Because the thing had already been sniffing our house. My father tried to pay it once before. He offered a calf. It did not take calves. It wanted blood bound to the house. It wanted a family line. We gave it the stillborn and it stepped back. We did not know for how long. When Clara could not carry after that, Eli said the thing still wanted its line. It wanted a child made in a knot so the knot could keep feeding it. I said, "Feeding it how?" Eli did not answer right away. He looked tired. He said, "You ever see ivy kill a tree? It does not bite it. It does not chop it. It wraps slow. It drinks the light. The tree stays standing while it dies. That is how this works," I said. "And Clara death," Mason said. "That was the thing too." Eli snapped at him. "No! That was us. We did that. Do not put our sin on the river." Mason looked at him like he wanted to spit. He said, "I do not know where the thing ends and we begin anymore." I did not either. The barn door behind Eli was half open. I could smell hay and old wood, and that iron damp again, faint but there. I felt a pressure in my chest that was not fear, not exactly. More like standing too close to a generator. I said, "Have you ever seen it?" Eli said, "I saw a shape once when I was 16, by the bend. I heard my father humming with the others. I went to look. I saw a man standing in the shallows, hair down to his shoulders, skin pale as river clay, eyes black with no white. He turned his head toward me, and I felt my legs stop working. My father grabbed me and dragged me away. He beat me after, not for being curious, but for being seen. He said, 'If the thing sees you, it remembers your face, and if it remembers your face, it wants you in the knot.' I said, 'You think it wanted you?' Eli said, 'It wanted the house. It wanted a line. It wanted a mouth to feed through.' I said, 'Why tell me now?' Eli said, 'Because you already know. Because Clara wrote it down and Samuel read it. Because once a story is spoken, the thing hears it again.' I said, 'Are you afraid it is listening?' Eli looked over my shoulder toward the trees and said, 'It has always been listening.' I left after that with my head full of river fog and questions that did not fit in any report. You don't put that in a case file. You don't call the state and say, 'By the way, this family might have made a pact with an old hunger in the woods.' They would send me to a therapist and close the file with a shrug. So I kept it to myself. But knowledge changes how you see a place. When I drove past that ridge after, I started noticing things I had ignored. How certain families never moved away though the land was poor. How certain barns had old salt circles at their thresholds. How old men would hum low when fog rolled in. Not a tune you could place, more like a habit their mouths had learned from fear. How the river bend was always empty of fishermen despite being the deepest pool for miles. People avoided it without knowing why. That is how old rules survive. They live under your tongue. Samuel left the county within a week of that call. He told me he could not raise his own kids under a sky that had watched his mother disappear in plain sight. He took the journal with him. I asked if he would ever share it. He said no. He said some stories need to die with their authors. I understood that, even if part of me wanted proof. Something I could hold like a hair in a bag and show to a man in a suit. Proof does not fix a thing like this. It just makes it louder. The years after were bleak for the Harlow brothers. Mason drank more, and now the drinking had a shape. It was not just sorrow. It was a man trying to numb memories of a riverbank hymn he had never wanted to sing. He started waking in the yard some mornings, barefoot, mud on his calves. No recollection of leaving the house. Eli would find him, haul him inside, sit him down, say nothing. Some nights Eli would wake with his sling off and wet prints by the back door. He would lock the door, set a chair against it, and still wake to the chair, moved, and the door cracked. Once, late in winter, I got a call from Jonah. He sounded shaken. He said, "Deputy, you need to come. My father is missing." I drove up. The yard was empty, truck still there, porch light on, back door open. Eli was on the porch in a coat he had not fastened, face gray. He said, "He went out in the night." I said, "When?" Eli said, "Sometime after midnight." I heard him walking. I told him to come back. He did not answer. I followed his prints to the lane. They went straight toward the river. I said, "Why did you not stop him?" Eli said, "If I go to that bend at night, the thing remembers me." I did not want it to remember me again. I said, "It might have taken him." Eli said, "It doesn't take what you already gave. It takes what you try to hide from it." I did not have time to argue. We searched with flashlights and radios. The fog was low. The pines were silent in the way they get when snow is coming. We found Mason at dawn, sitting on a log by the river, clothes soaked, hair plastered to his skull, humming. Low and steady. He did not stop when we came up. His eyes were fixed on the water. I touched his shoulder. He flinched like he had forgotten he had skin. I said, "Mason, you all right?" He looked at me and said, "She was there." I said, "Clara." He nodded slow. He said, "She was standing in the water holding the baby." She asked me why I broke the knot. I said, "Mason, you were dreaming." He shook his head. He said, "No, she was there." Eli came up behind me. Mason turned his head and stared at him with a look that had no brother in it. He said, "You said it would keep her alive." Eli whispered, "I lied." Mason laughed, then started sobbing so hard his whole body folded. We got him home. The doctor in town called it a breakdown. He gave him pills. Pills did not stop the humming. It happens like that sometimes. People can live with a secret if it stays in the dark. When the light hits it, the secret starts chewing from inside. From that winter on, Mason got worse. He would wander at night. He would wake in the attic. He would sit at the nursery door whispering to nobody. Jonah moved out after one too many nights of listening to his father cry in the hall and his uncle stand there helpless. Jonah told a friend later that the house felt occupied by something that was not grief, something that watched him from corners the way a cat watches a mouse. He started sleeping in his truck, then finally drove away without a note. Eli stayed because Eli had no other shape. The house was his skin by then. He did not know how to live without its weight. He kept the farm running small, sold off most of the herd, kept a dog that never barked at night but sometimes whined at the back door, like it heard steps in the dark. The last time I saw Eli alive was the spring before the fire. He came into town for nails and feed salt. I was at the diner. He sat 2 booths away and drank coffee black as a pond. When I went to pay, he stood too. He said, "Deputy." I said, "Eli." He hesitated, then said, "You think we were cursed?" I said, "I think you were desperate men who made hard choices." He nodded like he had expected that answer. He said, "Desperation is a kind of curse." He looked down at his hands and said, "When Clara died, the thing went hungry again. It wants its knot. It wants its line. It is looking for one now." I said, "Eli, you are talking like it is still your problem." He said, "It is anybody's problem who lives on this ridge and thinks love can be owned." He put money on the counter and left. A month after that, the county got another story that rhymed too close to be coincidence. A young couple on the ridge, not far from the river bend, lost a baby late term, stillborn, same as Clara first. They buried it in the family plot. 2 nights later, they reported the grave disturbed, dirt shoveled back, the tiny coffin lid cracked. The baby was gone. The sheriff sent men. They found nothing but damp mud prints leading toward the river. Big prints, bigger than any boot in that family. The couple moved away by summer without selling the house, just left it to rot. People said it was coyotes. People always say coyotes because coyotes are a word that makes fear feel normal. But the old men at the diner went quiet when the story came out. One of them, a man named Ronnie Pike, who had never raised his voice in public, started humming soft under his breath like it was a reflex. I watched him. When he realized I was watching, he stopped and looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Some debts don't die." Then the Harlow fire happened. A cold January night with wind that made the tin roof sing. The call came in after midnight. Smoke seen from the road. We rolled out. By the time we got there, the north side of the house was already gone, flames licking along the old dry studs like they had been waiting for a spark all their lives. We pulled hoses, we kicked doors, the heat was a wall. The roof groaned. A beam snapped and dropped in the kitchen where Clara had died, and for a heartbeat I saw a shape through the flames in that doorway, tall, shoulders wide, hair hanging wet and dark, though there was no water near it, just fire. I blinked, and it was smoke and falling ash, nothing more. I do not tell you that to convince you of anything. I tell you because it is what my eyes registered in that chaos. I went in with my mask on anyway, crawling low through heat. We found Eli near the nursery door, like they said later. He was curled on his side, arm out toward the threshold, as if he had been reaching for a room he could not enter anymore. The nursery was already ash when we got there. The cradle was a blackened frame. The rocking chair was on its side, with no legs left. When we pulled Eli out, his coat was wet. Not from hoses, wet like he had been in the river. That made no sense. The back door was locked from inside. The snow outside was unbroken. People said maybe a pipe burst. There were no pipes running that way. The coroner wrote smoke inhalation and heat trauma. That was true enough. But there are truths that do not fit in a line on a form. After Eli's funeral, Mason got smaller day by day. He stopped coming into town. He stopped answering Jonah calls. He sat in that trailer behind the mill and hummed. One night in late spring, a neighbor heard him singing, not humming, singing a low tune with words that did not make sense, like an old river hymn. The neighbor called me because he was scared. When I got there, the trailer was quiet. The door was open. There were muddy, bare footprints on the linoleum leading from the bed to the stove. There was a bowl of salt dumped in a circle on the floor, like someone had tried to trap something and failed. Mason was in his chair, head back, lips blue. Heart stopped. No sign of struggle, no bottle in his hand. Just his mouth half open, teeth bared, like he had wanted to speak and could not. The autopsy said heart failure. Mason had been a heavy drinker. It was plausible. I signed off. But when I walked out of the trailer at dawn, I saw one set of prints in the mud outside that were not Mason. Too long, too deep. They went toward the river. The river took them and did not give them back. Years have passed. The Harlow land is owned by a timber company now. The lane is grown over. The house is a soot scar in a clearing. The nursery ash is part of the soil. The river still bends where it bent. Fog still sits there on mornings when the air turns sweet and iron at once. I have gone down to that bend twice since. Once for a search and once because I could not stand not knowing what it felt like in daylight. Both times the birds were quiet. Both times the water sounded like it was breathing shallow. There is an old ferry landing rotting there, boards slick with moss. There are piles of river stones arranged in circles just above the high water line, too neat to be chance. The first time I saw them, I kicked one out of spite. The next day it was back in place. I told myself a current rolled it. That is a lie I was willing to live with. Samuel sent me a letter once, years after, when he had his first child. He wrote that he still did not know who his father was in blood, but he knew who his parents were in truth. He wrote that he had read Clara's journal a second time, slower. He wrote that the journal did not end with fear. It ended with a kind of acceptance. She wrote, "If the house is a mouth, then so are we. We eat each other with love and need and guilt. We offer parts of ourselves to stay alive. Maybe the river thing is only the shape our hunger takes when we are too ashamed to name it." She wrote, "I do not know if the third man is real. I only know he feels real when the night is long, and I only know that even if he is real, we invited him. Samuel said he kept that line close. He said he was raising his child in a place where secrets do not get to be kings. He thanked me for listening when the story was still hot. He said, "I think Mama wanted someone outside the knot to know the truth, so the truth could walk free, even if she never did." That letter sits in my desk drawer. I read it when the wind makes my windows creak at night and my own house feels too quiet. It is easy to look at the Harlow story as a freak thing, a scandal, a tragedy spun by three people who did not know better. But that is the surface. Underneath it is something older that crawls through a lot of families, not just theirs, the way grief makes us bargain, the way land makes men believe they own what they cannot, the way love can become a shrine or a cage depending on what you nail the door with. If you want a horror that lasts, you do not need fangs. You need a kitchen table, a dead baby, and a promise whispered in a room with no witnesses. It grows slow. It feels like rescue. Then one night the rescue turns hands into weapons and the house goes silent like a courtroom before verdict. People on that ridge still hum sometimes when fog comes in. They call it habit. They call it old songs. They do not call it what it is. A warning, a bell, a way to say to whatever listens in that bend, we remember the rule even if we do not speak it. I am not asking you to believe in a river thing. I am not asking you to believe in ghosts. I am asking you to look at the way desperation writes rules on our hearts and then pretends we chose them. The Harlow Pact lasted 30 years because it worked just enough to keep them from turning around. It gave them children. It gave them a farm that survived. It gave them a story the county applauded from a distance. Then it took everything back with interest because bargains like that always do. If you ever find yourself thinking a secret will save you, ask what it will cost in 10 years, in 30, in the last minute of a cold October night when a poker swings and a woman you love too much and not enough falls at the stove. The bill does not come due right away. That is why so many people sign, so that is the rest of it. Not neat, not clean, but true as far as my eyes and ears can take me. And if you live near old water and older trees and you ever hear a low humming you cannot place coming through fog at night, do not follow it. Close your door. Hold your family close if they want to be held. And do not make promises to grief that you cannot afford to keep. If you made it all the way through this one, thank you. Hit like and subscribe if you want more of these tales that do not stay buried. Stay safe out there and listen to your houses when they go quiet. Quiet is not an ending. Sometimes it is the thing waiting for you to say yes.